Welcome to Whitetail Rendezvous podcast, hosted by Bruce Hutchin, and episode number 143.
Welcome to Whitetail Rendezvous podcast, where it is all about whitetail deer hunting tips, techniques, and the stories so you can become a more successful whitetail deer hunter. And now your host, Bruce Hutchin.
Ron Spomer began hunting small game and exploring the natural world as a child, poking, prying, splashing, and groping through the mud and weeds. He's self-taught, do-it-yourself hunter, naturalist, birder, and wildlife photographer. Ron's also hunted quite a bit, and he spent the last 40 years as a licensed hunter, pursuing everything from bunnies and waterfowl to harlequin quail, grizzly bears in North America. He has also hunted South America, Africa, Asia, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Ron graduated with a BS in English at the University of South Dakota. He's taken many sheep, elk, traveled to Alaska, and he also trains springers and English setters. Ron has photographed the natural world and its wildlife around the globe. Images published in hundreds of magazines, books, catalogs, and campaigns. Self-taught birder with over 500 species on his life list. Has a strong curiosity about and interest in native plants, habitats, geology, ecology, and their impact on wildlife populations and behaviors. Welcome to another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous. This is your host. And ladies and gentlemen, I sure hope you got your ears on and going to listen, because Ron Spomer is joining us today. And Ron has been in the outdoor industry for many, many years, and he's hosted Winchester Legends, Whitetail Revolution, Outdoor Best 10, Outdoors Best 10 Best, Hunting 201, Winchester World of Whitetail, and now video production, Ron Spomer Outdoors on YouTube. And Ron has traveled the globe and brought myself along the trips with him through his writing. So, Ron, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Bruce. I appreciate being here. It's going to be good talking with you.
It sure is, and nobody's in Colorado's going any place because we got one heck of a storm still blowing, that's for sure.
Yeah, I hear you. You got hammered, but we need that moisture.
That's for sure. So before we get into the show, and listeners, Ron's agreed to be with us 3 or 4 times a year, so this is going to be a little intro on Ron, about 5 or so minutes on Ron giving us our background. Then we're going to get into something that's near and dear to his heart, and that's the younger generation. And he has an app, smartphone app called Everything Whitetail that he's going to talk about. So, Ron, let's kick off the show and let's share how you got in the business, go way back, where you started out in South Dakota, farm kid, and how you got to where you are today.
That's going way back, all right. Yeah, I was fortunate to grow up in small town America, out in a farm. All my family farmed, and that was the world back then. And, there really wasn't much in it for wildlife other than lots and lots of pheasants and waterfowl. Eastern South Dakota, of course, pheasant capital of the world, and we had that glacial pothole country. So even though we farmed it pretty hard, that was the whole idea back then, is to stay alive and make a living on the farm. We still had a lot of potholes, wetlands that were just low sinks that collected all the rainwater and the snow melt, and you couldn't farm it. So that's where the ducks nested, and then the cattails that grew around there held the pheasants. But it wasn't until about the mid-'60s that whitetail started to show up. And you can imagine what that did to a dreaming country boy like me. I had uncles and cousins who hunted, and I idolized them, and I wanted to be a hunter. But I also always had this, I don't know, it's almost an instinctive desire to go to the wilderness or the unknown. I would walk the railroad track that ran past the farm and look down it and watch those trains disappear into where I just assumed was some kind of a grand, wild hunting land out there that I just wanted to see. And I don't know where I got that idea, but I just always had it, and it always drove me. So as I grew up, I kept expanding farther and farther afield, hunting pheasants, of course, and then waterfowl. And we would just walk from the farm or out of town and maybe make a loop of 3 miles out and back and hunt rabbits and pheasants and whatever we could find. But when I bumped into whitetails, my heart just about leaped out of my chest. I mean, holy mackerel, here was this large animal, and it had antlers, for gosh sake. And we'd read about this in Outdoor Life and Sports Afield, and here it was in our own backyards. It was like that grand wilderness I'd always imagined had actually come right into the back cornfield. So that really got me going. And once I got wheels under me at about 15, we could be driving, I was able now to go 10, 12 miles out of town and discover more of these big wetlands and wilder areas. And that just turned me loose. I mean, I became a trapper and an archer, bow hunting for deer, you name it. If it was out there, it was wild, we were after it. Of course, that included some fishing too. And then when I approached adulthood and realized I had to keep myself alive by working for a living, I figured I didn't want to continue hauling bales and plowing fields and shingling barns and the things that we were doing then. So I had kind of a knack for writing, and my high school English teacher encouraged me, told me I wrote pretty good stories, and of course that flatters any high school kid. So I applied myself and went to college, got myself a little teaching certificate so I could always teach school in the summer. I could take off and go fishing at least. I thought really would be cool if they gave us the fall off as a teacher. So that was sort of a back plan. But my intent really was to try to be what I really didn't know much about, an outdoor writer. And my model, of course, was Homer Circle and Jack O'Connor and Elmer Keith and all the people who wrote in those hunting magazines that I just poured over every month. So that was my inspiration. And went to college, got that English degree so I could teach school, and did that for a couple of years while I tried freelancing, which is, anyone can do this, Bruce. You just sit down and you write a story and you send it out to see if somebody will buy it and publish it. And as luck would have it, when I wrote my first 5 stories and sent them out, all 5 of them sold. I don't know how often something like that happens because the next 5 didn't, but that was enough to really cement this idea that I could probably make a living, or at least part of a living, by being an outdoor writer. And
good for you.
Yeah, it was, and I have to credit my folks, the whole family, that culture I grew up in, which was work, work, work. And if you live on a farm and you want to make it, you're fighting Mother Nature. So you've got to, there's no days off. You don't get Saturday off when you're milking cows. You don't get Sunday off. You go to church and you get back and go to work again. So I had I think the necessary work ethic, and that combined with the wonderful experiences and adventures I had by living out in that farm country in an open part of the world where a guy could go out and hunt and trap and learn the ropes. I had real honest experiences. I wasn't echoing someone else's. So I think that helped the authenticity of what I wrote about. So, yeah, from there it was just indulge, hunt as much as I could and write about it, and use the money I made to do some more. And then just continue progressing on through the 80s and the 90s and into the 21st century.
Ron, I'm asked by a number of listeners, or they'll send me an email, or they'll just say, Bruce, how do I get into the industry? And you just gave a really good footprint of what you did. So capsulize it. Can you give us 3 things that if somebody's listening, say, I want to be that guy, or gal. What are the 3, and you can elongate it to 5 if you want, 5 things that you'd say that you really should hone in on and do, because it's not so much writing more, it's a digital media, if you agree with that.
Yeah, I do. I think you just need to say communication. However you deliver your message, it's the message that's important. So I think the number one thing is authenticity, and you can include honesty in that, but just don't fake it. Don't try to tell stories that aren't real, or pretend you know something about archery or rifle hunting that you really don't. No secondhand stuff, in other words. And we're all susceptible to a degree, but try to prove it first and write what you know. That's always been a standard in writing. Write what you know. The second is that work ethic I talked about, and perseverance. You have to stick with it. It's too easy to get discouraged and slough off and even quit. And I've seen a lot of guys over the years with great writers. They pop up, you read their stuff and say, oh my gosh, this guy or this gal can really write. But then they would disappear because they just couldn't stick it out. So you have to have that. And beyond that, I think it's just a matter of getting a field and doing that hunting, fishing, whatever it is you want to write about, and experience it as much as you possibly can. I think in your first few years, you really have to invest most of what you make in profit in getting back out there to get new material. Because obviously someone who's been hunting in, say, Alaska 14 or 15 times can write about that, whereas the guy who's been up there once still needs to learn a whole bunch more about it. And the nice thing with all of this is that most of us live somewhere where we can become experts on whitetail deer hunting, or rabbits or raccoons or anything. There's some sort of outdoor activity where you live that you can become an expert at without a lot of expense. A lot of time, yes, but you don't have to travel around the world to do this. Backyard is the place to get started.
Let's just slip in lessons learned that Mr. Wonderful has taught you throughout your years in whitetail hunting.
Lessons in whitetail hunting. Oh my gosh, Brewster.
Lessons learned, not lessons in. Lessons learned. You got schooled by Mr. I called a very mature buck Mr. Wonderful, so that's where that came from.
Sure.
So
I thought you were talking about Larry Weisshuhn there, Mr. Wonderful.
No. He's pretty good in his own right, isn't he?
Oh, yeah, he's been around. He knows his stuff, yeah. He's a great example of an honest guy, too, who does it right. You know, he's got the experience, and he doesn't pull the wool over anybody's eyes or even attempt to. Now, what whitetails have taught me pretty much everything about whitetail hunting. As a kid, you read a few articles and you think you know it all, and then you start to realize, oops, you really don't. But I think the biggest lesson that they have taught me is patience. As a kid, I just didn't have any patience. I had to make things happen. So I was constantly getting up and moving and changing. And to a degree, that has helped me, I think, a lot in my whitetail hunting. But there are many times when I picked up and moved just when that big guy was coming in. And I think most of us have been caught that way, the old caught with your pants down. So the older I get, the less I want to run around because it's just a lot harder to run around. Nonetheless, I still fight this urge to go see what's over the hill when I need to stick where I am sometimes and let things play out. And what I've learned over the years by watching some of these big bucks through a binocular or a spotting scope is how long they can stay in one position when you think, by golly, he must have moved out of the area by now. 15, 20 minutes goes by and you saw a buck move into a little piece of cover on his way to a feed field, and he suddenly stopped, and you think, well, he must have bedded in there, or he turned around and went the other way. Very often I've been in a position where I've watched that buck, and he's just standing there looking out. I don't know. I assume that he's waiting to see that the coast is clear, but good Lord, 15, 20 minutes of this, you would think, by now you've got it figured out, buddy. You're not seeing anything. You're not hearing anything. You don't smell it. Move along. But for whatever reason, those crafty old bucks will just stand there or lie down, and you've got to be able to have enough patience to let it play out. So, yeah, that's a tough one, but it's one I've learned over and over again, and I still do.
Thanks for that. Today, listeners, we're going to focus on something that's very near and dear to Ron. All my guests, I asked them, what are 3 things that are important to you? And Ron touched upon a couple: hunter conservation, ethics, and his mobile app, Everything Whitetail. And this app is his attempt to reach the younger generation. So, Ron, for a good part of the show, I want you to talk about that, the importance of getting kids in the outdoors and how we reach them.
Oh, yeah. You know, that is really huge at this day and age. Back when it was easy because we grew up with the stimulation of wild places and wildlife. Today, most kids are living in suburbia or in town, and even if the ones who live in the country don't often have the kind of access, the free access we did to the natural world. And I think that's a major shame, and it's really going to hurt us in the long run, because if a kid can't get out on his own, not necessarily under the tutelage of Ma, Pa, or Grandpa, or grandma, if that kid can't get out there and poke around in the sticks and the mud and the woods and discover these wonderful mysteries and marvels of nature and become attached to it in that way, I think they lose the incentive, especially when they get involved in all their computer games and the electronic lives that they're starting to live these days. So most of us can't buy a 10,000-acre ranch to turn our kids loose on, or our grandkids. So what can we do? Well, one thing is to, I think, feed them the proper stuff, or the outdoor things as much as we can on the media that they consume, which is no longer necessarily the Outdoor Life magazines and the sporting classics that I looked at when I was a kid. They look at those apps, or they're something on a computer. So I think what we need to do as an industry is to deliver the information and the education that those kids are looking for, where they're looking for it. And that's why we created Everything Whitetail. It is a phone app. You can put it on iPads and those sorts of things too, so it's a mobile app, I guess would be the proper term for it. And it's essentially 3 books in bite-sized pieces with some video and lots of photos and things to make it a little more stimulating and interactive. And it's not just for kids, but what it is, it includes a hunting book. We call it The Hunt, and it's all about hunting tactics and everything that you want to know about how to be a better hunter. Rattling and grunting and calling and tracking and looking at the habitat and figuring out where whitetails go. We even include whitetail hunting by habitat, so there are instructions on the differences hunting them in grasslands versus marshlands versus deciduous forests, desert mountains, you name it. If a whitetail lives there, we try to cover that habitat. And then you can get in, and you can read that in chunks here and there. You don't have to read it like a book, on and on and on. You just page by page read a couple of paragraphs that describe one hunting tactic or something you were interested in knowing. The next book is The Deer, and that's all about natural history, why whitetails do what they do, why they grunt and why they wheeze and why they drop their antlers and all that interesting biological stuff. A lot of details on that, and that includes seasonal behavior, so it helps you understand what they're doing and why they're doing and how you can apply that to your hunting success. And then the third book is what we call The Gear. And there, of course, we've got all the guns and ammo and clothing and boots and knives and rattling antlers and all the paraphernalia that whitetail hunters love. So the details are in there, lots of instructional videos on how to use this stuff, how to perform with your rifle, how to practice without using up ammunition with a dry gun, with dry firing and handling, and just a lot of practical things. And the kids that have used this app just love it. I've had mothers and fathers say that ever since Johnny got Everything Whitetail, instead of playing his silly shoot-'em-up games, he is learning about whitetail and whitetail hunting, and that's really helped guide him or inspire him to be more of an outdoors person. He reads and sees things on the app, and he wants to do those. So he's now, instead of saying, I don't want to go outside, it's too cold, he wants to get out there and try some of these things. And that's what we're hoping will happen with that app, and it seems like it's working. So that's a big part of the reason.
Is that a free app?
Well, right now it isn't. We're just getting it started, and it's on sale for $5 on app and the iOS platform and the Android platform. But we're looking with some different conservation agencies and some potential sponsors who might look at making it a free app by helping fund some of this down the road. So it's a little bit in flux right now, but we've got plans to upgrade, continually upgrade and improve it. So if someone gets it now, they'll get all the upgrades down the road to keep it rolling with new videos, new how-tos. As new products come out, we may put hey, here's a nifty new device for finding whitetails or something, or dragging them out of the woods easier. We might include some things like that in there and start adding links. So then that's one of the nice things about apps and all this electronic stuff, even though it drives us older guys kind of crazy trying to figure it out. It's really nice to update it quickly. You can stay on top of things. You don't have to wait 4 years and get a new book published. You just add a few pages to that electronic book that's already out there. And that's essentially what it'll do.
Have you talked to Kip Adams or Lindsey Thomas down at QDMA?
Not recently. Yeah, that's a good point. I need to.
And Hank, he's in charge of the Rack Pack, and Hank's in charge of that. But those are the three guys that I would reach out to, and Hank Forrester, and I'd reach out to them. They've all been on my show. They're great guys.
Yeah.
And they're always looking for ways to do that, to get people, kids involved, because that's the future of our sport.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. I will probably see those guys here soon. The Safari Club International Convention's coming up. And I usually meet those guys there, so I will run them down and show it to them and see what we can come up with. But those are the kind of groups that I want to work with this.
Yeah, and, of course, they know you. I was going to say, just use my name. I'm going, Bruce, stop.
Yeah, there you go.
That was kind of funny. I even thought of that. So let's take my grandson. He's 14 years old. He loves to hunt, and he uses his smartphone extensively, and so now I can say, Tyler, why don't you learn about hunting whitetails in Iowa? And would he be able to do that, or is it just a more general, overall, or do you have it, I'm going to call it regional specific?
Yeah, we have it habitat specific. So for Iowa, of course, you would go to the farmlands for the description of what it's like, what the habitat is like, and how deer respond to it. So that applies to Iowa very well. It's what do whitetails do when they're living in cornfields with narrow strips of tree cover here and there, farmstead tree lots, maybe a few hills with some woods on it, and great big extensive fields. How do you find the deer? How do they use that habitat? And where do you put your stands? How do you cut them off, find out their travel routes, use pinch points, and all the things that Midwest hunters do? Those are the kinds of tactics that would be in that segment. We also have links there for all of the state fish and game agencies so they can get your regulations and rules and stuff. So if you wonder, can I hunt with a rifle in Iowa, you go to the Iowa DNR site right there on the app. You just click it and it'll take you to them, and then you'll find out it's a shotgun-only state, and you'll get your season regulations and all that kind of stuff. So we've tried to anticipate what a deer hunter might want while he's using the app, and we've even thrown in a little trivia fun game for the boring times you're sitting on stand and nothing's happening. You can play the trivia game, which is just a series of questions and answers about whitetails, whitetail behavior, hunting, ballistic shooting, and you name it. Yeah, everybody enjoys it just because it's, I think I know the answer to this one, and it's always fun to see if you got it right.
Say, let's talk about the cookbook portion of Everything Whitetail. Over the years, you get so many great recipes coming out of deer camps and deer lodges, and I saw that you have that, and that's one thing, listeners. Yes, it's about hunting and shooting a deer, whatever that deer trophy, quote unquote, is to you. Then that's a wonderful harvest. Having said that, we need more and more great ways to cook it. And I enjoyed, seeing that part in that deer app. So talk a little about cooking up whitetail.
Sure. Yeah, we've got an extensive section on how to shoot a whitetail for the best eating. And, it starts with shooting a calm deer that's not been run around and doesn't have his blood up. He's not all hot and bothered. It's a nice clean kill. And then how do you take care of him in the field? We discuss aging, what it is and how to do it, keeping things clean and all. And then once you've got the carcass ready to butcher, we go step by step on how to cut it up, bone it, cut out the chops and the roasts and grind the hamburger and all the rest of it. And then we've got a template laid out for recipes. We only have a handful in there now, but what we're thinking of doing, because this is such an interactive app, is that invite people to send in their recipes, and then we might have a contest to sample those and see whose is the best, and maybe have a recipe of the week or the month or something as we get this thing progressing down the road. So we'll just constantly build on it that way.
Thanks for that. And we've got about 5 minutes left. And so in this segment, let's just touch on the hunting tradition.
This is another one that's near and dear to my heart, because I hate to say it, but in the last 15, 20 years with all the television shows and electronic media, I think we're really starting to stand out or somehow emphasize some of the less ethical parts of hunting. I don't know how else to say it without stepping on too many toes, but there's just too much horsing around out there. I don't think a whitetail hunting show has to be all serious and maudlin and everybody's crying because they shot a deer, but neither do I think we have to act like sometimes buffoons, and unfortunately I think we do emphasize that for the entertainment value. It's always entertaining to have a comedian, but you stick a comedian out deer hunting, and it's one thing to make a funny joke in camp, but it's another to make jokes or slapstick humor in the field that either shows unsafe gun handling, for instance, or disrespect, I think, to the resource. And that's always a sore spot with me, is that if I watch a show or read an article and the author or the host is making light of both my hunting heritage and what it means to all of us, and the nature itself, when they treat deer with disrespect or anything else and just make the whole thing into a big goofball party, that really bothers me. And the other thing is that that's what they're teaching our young people. And if you've got children who grow up watching goofy behavior on TV and then they emulate it, and you end up with, well, let me rephrase that a bit. Not just goofy, but I don't know how to say this one either, but you know how hunters are looking kicked off these days? How we've sort of militarized hunting. Everybody has military fatigues on, and military-style camouflage is coming in popular now. Nothing wrong with that. But then they paint their faces black, and all the ads, everybody looks angry. I think it's an attempt to make it look like I'm a macho man, and I'm going to go out there and tackle nature, and by golly, that appeals to young people, because young people want to prove themselves. I get that. But I think it's made us all look like we're out there beating up on nature rather than interacting with her as a natural predator, natural carnivores who are doing something sustainable because we love it. You just don't see that today in too many of these programs. It's like, I'm going to get out there and I'm going to shoot the biggest buck, I'm going to hammer him, I'm going to crush him, and we use all this violent language to describe something that to me is joyful and uplifting, and it builds up my spirit. And I just don't get that in too many of these communications. And maybe we blame Madison Avenue because they're the ones who pick the photographs that go with advertising the new raging, crazy cutting bow or broadhead or smashing, punching rifle. It's just, maybe I'm off base on this, but I think we need to back off a little bit so that the general population understands that we hunt because we love it, not because we're angry about it. We're not out there to beat up these animals and kill them. We're there to make our annual harvest and celebrate the fact that we can live on Earth with whitetails and elk and moose and caribou and wildflowers and the whole pantheon of nature. That's what we're trying to preserve here. It's the outdoors that we love and our freedom to be in those outdoors interacting with it. The same as a coyote or a wolf or a lion. They're out there being natural predators. Why can't we be? We've got just as much right. We do have the responsibility, of course, to do it right and to abstain from over-harvest. And we've done a beautiful job of that for the last 150 years. I mean, we always say hunters are the greatest conservationists. And it's true, but we just haven't been projecting that image for the last 20 years or so. And I think we need to get back to that.
Ron, that reminds me, a couple of years ago, I was in Iowa visiting or hunting Judd Cooney and Sherry Yarborough's farm and muzzleloading hunt, and actually my first muzzleloading hunt. And I finished the hunt, and at the final dinner with just a few guys, they have a very small camp, 6 people. I stood up and said to Judd and the other people around, I refound the joy of the hunt. And by that, I mean, it wasn't just trying to put something on the ground. It wasn't trying to bring out a score sheet. It was simply sitting in a stand, sitting in a tree stand, box stand, whatever, and spending 5 days and watching these magnificent critters go about their normal life. And at the end of the day, yeah, I did harvest one, but it was the whole joy of the hunt that I'm echoing what you said. That's what, in my opinion, is missing. It's the joy to be out there. And if it becomes a job and it's arduous and you have to get the scripts that make you something you're not, then it takes away from the whole adventure.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that these television hosts or writers are that way. I think they're just portrayed that way. I think that's a mistake we're making. They think it's necessary to portray themselves as super macho conquerors of nature, and probably works. They're selling product, but I just don't think in the long run it's going to help our hunting heritage. I think we risk alienating non-hunters who ultimately will have a say. They can pass these citizen referendums and go vote, and you've seen it in California and Oregon and different places bit by bit. If they don't like the way we're conducting ourselves, they can vote us right out of the field.
Ron, we're at that point in the show. You get about 90 seconds to give shout-outs to hundreds and thousands of people and friends. So I know that's not going to happen, but just take a time and give a shout-out to the people that have supported you along the way.
Well, obviously, you give the support to the Academy who voted for you, and the mom and dad who raised you right, and your wife who puts up with you, and all of that wonderful stuff. People know and expect that. But really, it's our hunting heritage and all of the wonderful people who have supported the North American model of wildlife conservation that makes all this possible. If not for conservation hunters like Theodore Roosevelt, who was one of the big ones who started it all, got away from market hunting and started what we have today, we would not have all the deer that we do. We wouldn't have all of even the wolves. We brought the wolves back. And the only reason that wolves are able to make it is because hunters paid for all the programs that restored the deer and the elk that the wolves eat. And yet we get yelled at because we're occasionally wanting to reduce the wolf population. Well, thanks for hunting. Thanks to all of you guys out there who've done this. Pay your bills, buy your tags and licenses, go out and improve the habitat, stand up politically in support of the outdoors, wildlife, nature. That's what makes the difference. It has made the difference, and it's what we need to continue to do even more aggressively if we want to continue hunting in the future. We've just got to get out there, get on the ground, and do the hard work. And conservation, that's the key.
Ron, thank you so much for being on the show, and I can't wait till next time when we'll spend a few minutes just sitting on the front porch and talking more about whitetails and the hunting tradition, and maybe throwing in some of your stories in other parts of the world. So, sir, it's been a pleasure.
It has been my pleasure, Bruce. I'm looking forward to the next time. Thank you.
As your host at Whitetail Rendezvous, I want to thank each and every one of you for spending your time with us today. I look forward to sharing with you in the next episode more whitetail hunting tips, techniques, and stories. Until then, keep the sun at your back, the wind in your face, and always be patient. If you have any tips, comments, or suggestions, or what we can do to improve, because we're here to serve you, let us know. Thanks for listening to Whitetail Rendezvous Podcast at www.whitetailrendezvous.com.